All right, so let's dive right into this question that you brought to us today. Can Donald Trump run for president again in 2028? You've showed some really interesting excerpts from a Reddit discussion and an article from Rolling Stone. So we've got a lot to dig into.
Yeah, and the timing really couldn't be more relevant. I mean, we're
Yeah.
just wrapping up the 2024 election, and this question's already making waves.
Yeah.
It's interesting, to see the range of opinions and interpretations we're seeing, from strictly legal analysis to even comparisons with leaders like Putin who have, shall we say, stretched the boundaries of their power.
It's kind of mind-boggling, right? And so the 22nd Amendment seems to be like the central point of contention here.
Yeah,
Everyone's talking about it as the main obstacle to a third term.
absolutely. And the 22nd Amendment is pretty clear on this matter. Um, to understand the debate, it helps to look at the exact language. No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. Pretty straightforward, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it does. But you know what they say about the devil being in the details? The sources bring up this question that I bet has crossed your mind, and I'm sure it's crossed the minds of a lot of our listeners. What about non-consecutive terms? Does the 22nd Amendment apply if there's a gap between presidencies?
Ah, that's a great point. The amendment itself doesn't say consecutively, and that, has fueled a lot of the debate. However, legal experts generally agree that it applies to any two terms, so back to back or with a break in between.
Okay, so that seemingly simple question about non-consecutive terms has just ignited a firestorm of debate. And then we have Steve Bannon, entering the fray, suggesting that Trump could run in 2028. I'm sure that did not sit well with everyone.
Oh, Bannon's claim definitely stirred the pot, and what's ironic is that even the conservative lawyer that Bannon cited, Mike Davis, called this idea crazy.
Oh, wow. So even within Trump's own circles, this idea is getting some pushback. But the sources don't stop there. They also explore some, well, let's call them creative legal interpretations.
Yeah. And these alternative interpretations have sent some shockwaves through that Reddit thread that you shared.
Yeah.
Some users are absolutely convinced that Trump just can't run again. They cite the 22nd Amendment and they talk about how hard it would be to amend the Constitution. They're basically saying, case closed.
While others are practically bracing for the apocalypse, they're convinced that Trump or the Supreme Court will find some loophole and just toss the Constitution aside. It's fascinating to see these extreme reactions. A little frightening too.
Yeah, I understand their concern. The Supreme Court's role in all of this is significant. I mean, especially with its current conservative majority. And remember, 3 of the current justices were appointed by Trump himself.
And we can't forget that this is the same court that allowed Trump on the ballot in 2024, despite those accusations of inciting insurrection. So it's no wonder that people are wondering if they might interpret the 22nd Amendment in a way that, well, aligns with Trump's ambitions.
Yeah, it's a legitimate question. And this is where things get really interesting. Some legal scholars have actually proposed some hypothetical scenarios where Trump could technically serve a third term without directly being elected.
Wait, hold on. You've got to tell me more about these scenarios. This is where I need to grab my popcorn.
So one example that's been floated is what we might call the vice presidential ascent scenario. So imagine this. Trump becomes vice president, and then the elected president resigns. Technically, under this scenario, he could ascend to the presidency without having been directly elected to the office for a third time.
Okay, that's a twist I didn't see coming. But wouldn't that go against the spirit of the 22nd Amendment? Even if it, technically fits the wording, it feels like a loophole that completely undermines the intention behind the amendment.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it is one I want to pose to you and to all of our listeners out there. Does the intention behind the amendment outweigh its literal interpretation in these extreme cases? It's something to think about as we delve deeper into this.
All right, so we've got this incredibly complex web of legal arguments and political maneuvering and just public anxiety swirling around this question of a third term. It's enough to make anyone's head spin.
It certainly is, but amidst all of the speculation and the fear, there's one source you provided that offers a very different and perhaps more grounded perspective. The Rolling Stone article, the author, David S. Cohen, completely rejects Bannon's claim, and he emphasizes how straightforward the 22nd Amendment really is.
So in Cohen's view, this whole debate is just a lot of hot air.
Well, not entirely. While he believes the amendment is clear, he acknowledges that the Supreme Court ultimately has the power to interpret the Constitution. And he issues a pretty stark warning. He says that if the court were to side with Trump on this issue, it could signal a dangerous erosion of democratic norms.
Okay, now we're getting into some serious territory. What kind of consequences is Cohen talking about?
Well, he paints a pretty grim picture. He suggests that such a decision could pave the way for the very things that those Reddit users are terrified of. Consolidation of power, potential crackdown on dissent, ultimately a slide towards authoritarianism. He even draws parallels to events like the Great Depression and the rise of concentration camps. The stakes, he suggests, couldn't be higher.
Wow, that's a lot to process. We've got, people predicting the end of democracy as we know it, while others are clinging to the Constitution as our ultimate safeguard. It's fascinating how this seemingly simple question about term limits has just tapped into these really deep anxieties about the future of our country.
It really is. It really speaks to how deeply intertwined, law and politics and public perception really are. We can't analyze one without considering the others.
So where we go from here? I mean, we've got these polar opposite views, and both with compelling arguments. It's like we're standing at a crossroads, and the path we choose will have these really profound consequences for the future of American democracy.
You hit the nail on the head. And navigating this crossroads requires us to move beyond these surface level arguments. We need to delve into the heart of these anxieties that are fueling this debate. So let's turn our attention to those Redditors that you mentioned. Their comments offer this really raw, unfiltered glimpse into the fears and the hopes of everyday Americans grappling with these really complex issues.
Lead the way. I'm eager to hear what those Redditors had to say.
Okay, so let's start by examining the arguments from those who believe the Constitution is strong enough to withstand any attempts to circumvent it. Their perspective offers some really valuable insights into the enduring power of our founding document. One user, who goes by the handle Shattered Reality, argues that amending the Constitution to allow a third term for Trump is basically impossible. They point out the really high bar required. Supermajority vote in both houses of Congress and ratification by 3/4 of the states. Given the current political climate, they believe it's highly unlikely.
That makes sense. Amending the Constitution is no walk in the park, right? It's designed to be, difficult, a process meant to protect against impulsive changes. But what about the folks on the other side of the coin? The ones who are less convinced that the Constitution will hold up? What are their counter-arguments?
Well, some users, like one who goes by Caladude69, they express deep skepticism about the effectiveness of laws and norms in today's political climate. They argue that we've entered this new paradigm where established rules no longer apply,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to figures like Trump.
So their argument is less about the specific wording of the 22nd Amendment and more about just a general erosion of democratic norms and institutions. It's like they're saying the rules don't matter if no one's willing to enforce them.
Exactly. They believe that the Republican Party, with the potential backing of a conservative-leaning Supreme Court, they'll just find a way to circumvent or reinterpret the Constitution to achieve their goals. They see a system where power just trumps principle, and that's a really unsettling thought.
It definitely raises some red flags. They're basically arguing that the problem isn't the law itself, but the willingness of those in power to actually uphold it. And their fear is just amplified by the fact that the current Supreme Court, with its conservative majority, could play a decisive role in interpreting the 22nd Amendment.
Yeah, and their fear is understandable, especially when we think about some past Supreme Court decisions that have had a profound impact on interpreting constitutional amendments. One example that stands out is the landmark case of Brown v. Board of Education back in 1954.
Brown v. Board of Education. The case that declared state-sponsored segregation in public schools unconstitutional. Wasn't that based on the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause?
Precisely. The court, in a unanimous decision, interpreted the 14th Amendment in a way that fundamentally reshaped the social and legal landscape of America. It's a powerful example of how judicial interpretation can have far-reaching consequences,
Yeah.
even overturning these long-standing practices that were deeply ingrained in society.
So bringing it back to our current situation, those Redditors who are worried about the Supreme Court potentially reinterpreting the 22nd Amendment, they're essentially drawing a parallel to cases like Brown v. Board of Education, where the court's decision had this seismic impact on how we understand and apply the Constitution.
That's a very astute observation. And this fear is further fueled by Trump's history of challenging norms and pushing the boundaries of his authority. I mean, if he's willing to question the results of an election, some argue, wouldn't he be willing to challenge the limits imposed by the 22nd Amendment as well?
I see their point. It's like they're looking at Trump's past actions as a predictor of his future behavior. But is there any historical precedent for a president outright defying a constitutional amendment? Has that ever happened before?
Well, while we haven't seen a president directly defy a constitutional amendment in the modern era, some users in the Reddit thread draw parallels with earlier periods in American history, particularly the era before the 22nd Amendment was ratified.
You're talking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right? He served 4 terms as president,
Okay.
which is what ultimately led to the passage of the 22nd Amendment, to limit future presidents to 2 terms.
Exactly. And FDR's situation is a prime example of how presidential power can be, expanded beyond the original intentions of the Constitution. He served during a time of national crisis, the Great Depression and World War II. And many Americans felt that his continued leadership was essential for the country's survival. However, his multiple terms also raised concerns about the potential for one person to hold too much power for too long.
So it's like FDR's situation was a catalyst for the 22nd Amendment. People saw the potential risks of unlimited presidential terms, and they wanted to create a safeguard against that happening again.
That's a great way to put it. And the fact that some Redditors are invoking FDR's example, it shows how deeply this debate resonates with our anxieties about executive power and the potential for a single individual to amass too much influence.
It's fascinating how these historical examples can shed light on our current political dilemmas. But I'm curious, what about those Redditors who are drawing comparisons between Trump and leaders like Putin? That seems like a pretty bold claim.
It is a bold claim, and it's one that's been circulating both in support of and in opposition to Trump. Some see the comparison as a way to emphasize what they perceive as Trump's authoritarian tendencies. His disregard for democratic norms and his apparent admiration for strongman leaders. Others use it to stoke fear, to portray America as teetering on the brink of dictatorship. It's a very loaded comparison, often used for rhetorical effect rather than substantive analysis.
So how do we unpack this comparison? Is there any real merit to it, or is it just political hyperbole?
Well, it's important to acknowledge that there are some surface-level similarities. Both Trump and Putin have cultivated a cult of personality. They've demonized their opponents. They've shown a willingness to bend or break rules to achieve their goals. They've both launched attacks on the media. They've sought to undermine democratic institutions, and they've shown a penchant for consolidating power.
Okay, so there are some parallels in their style and tactics. But does that automatically make them political twins? I mean, aren't there also some pretty fundamental differences between the American and Russian political systems?
Absolutely. And those differences are crucial to consider. The United States has this long-standing tradition of democratic governance. We have a robust system of checks and balances and a fiercely independent judiciary. Russia, on the other hand, has a history of authoritarianism. They have a weaker tradition of democratic institutions and a judiciary that's much more susceptible to political pressure.
So even if Trump aspired to be, a Putin-like figure, he would face far greater obstacles in the American system. Our democratic guardrails are much stronger.
That's a key point. And it's crucial to remember that the United States is not Russia. We have a different history, a different culture, and a different set of political norms. While we should absolutely be vigilant about the potential for democratic backsliding, we should also avoid these simplistic comparisons that fail to capture the nuances of our own political system.
It's like comparing apples and oranges, right? They might both be fruit, but they have very distinct characteristics and flavors.
Exactly. And drawing a direct line between Trump and Putin just ignores those crucial distinctions, and it also risks fueling unwarranted fear and undermining faith in our own democratic institutions.
So it seems like this comparison, while attention grabbing is more about sparking emotional reactions than promoting nuanced understanding. It's important to be aware of the potential dangers of authoritarianism, but also to avoid falling into the trap of seeing dictators under every rock.
You hit the nail on the head. The key is to find that sweet spot between healthy skepticism and unwavering faith. We need to be aware of the potential threats to our democracy without succumbing to the belief that the system is inherently rigged or beyond repair.
So it's about finding that balance between vigilance and trust. Yeah, acknowledging the risks without losing sight of the strengths of our system and the resilience of our institutions.
Precisely. And this brings us to a crucial question. How can we, as engaged citizens, navigate this really complex landscape? How can we contribute to a more constructive and informed dialogue about the future of our democracy?
That's a great question. I mean, we've explored the anxieties and the fears surrounding a potential Trump third term, but is there room for a more productive conversation about this? I mean, can we disagree without descending into chaos?
Absolutely. And I think the key lies in shifting our approach from debate to dialogue. Instead of viewing these conversations as battles to be won or lost, we can approach them as opportunities for shared learning and understanding.
So it's about moving away from this me versus you mentality and embracing a more collaborative approach where we acknowledge the complexity of the issues and we respect the validity of different perspectives.
Exactly. Imagine a scenario where instead of resorting to name calling or dismissing opposing viewpoints, we enter these conversations with a genuine curiosity to understand the other side's perspective.
Okay, I like where this is going. So instead of just throwing around accusations of unconstitutional or dictatorship, we actually try to listen to each other's concerns and find some common ground.
Precisely. For instance, someone who firmly believes the 22nd Amendment is this unbreakable barrier, they could engage with someone who's worried about the Supreme Court's potential influence. Instead of shutting down the conversation, they could acknowledge those fears, perhaps even citing historical examples of how judicial interpretation has shaped constitutional law.
That's a great point. It's about shifting the tone from "you're wrong" to "I understand your concern and here's why I see things differently." It's about acknowledging the nuances and complexities of the issue, right?
Absolutely. A productive dialogue embraces nuance. It recognizes that even these seemingly straightforward legal provisions can be subject to interpretation,
Yes.
especially within a dynamic political landscape.
So someone who's worried about Trump ignoring the rules altogether could engage with someone who trusts the system to hold. Instead of immediately assuming malicious intent, they could explore the checks and balances designed to prevent such a scenario.
That's an excellent example. That conversation could delve into the role of Congress, the potential for legal challenges, and the power of public opinion to shape political outcomes. It's about recognizing that our democracy is a system of shared responsibility, not just this rigid set of rules.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this shift in an approach could make a real difference. But let's be honest, some folks out there are just deeply entrenched in their beliefs. How do we bridge that divide? How do we have a productive conversation with someone who seems determined to cling to their perspective regardless of evidence or logic?
That's where active listening becomes crucial. It's about going beyond simply hearing the words someone is saying and actually trying to understand the underlying emotions and experiences and values that shape their worldview.
So it's about empathy, right? It's putting ourselves in the other person's shoes and trying to see the world from their perspective. It's about recognizing that their beliefs, even if we disagree with them, they come from a place of personal experience and deeply held values.
Exactly. And this doesn't mean we have to agree with everything they say, but it does mean we acknowledge their right to hold those beliefs. And we approach the conversation with a genuine desire to understand where they're coming from.
That sounds incredibly challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. Imagine having a conversation where even if you don't change someone's mind, you at least walk away with a better understanding of their perspective. That feels like progress, even if it's just a small step.
It absolutely is progress, because that understanding is the foundation for building bridges, for finding common ground, and for working together to address the challenges that we face as a society.
Okay, so we're talking about a a shift from debate to dialogue, from trying to win an argument to trying to understand each other. But I'm curious in the context of this specific deep dive, what are some concrete examples of how this approach could play out? Let's say I'm talking to someone who's absolutely convinced that Trump will find a way to serve a third term no matter what. How do I engage with them in a way that's productive and respectful, even if I completely disagree with their premise?
That's a great question, and it's one that gets to the heart of how we can have these difficult conversations without letting them devolve into shouting matches or unproductive arguments. First, resist the urge to immediately counter their claims with legal arguments or historical precedents. Instead, ask open-ended questions to explore their perspective. You might say something like, I hear your concern that Trump might try to circumvent the 22nd Amendment. What specific actions or strategies worry you the most?
Okay, so I'm not dismissing their concerns outright. I'm inviting them to elaborate, to share their thought process, and to help me understand the specific things that are driving their anxiety.
Exactly. And as they respond, listen attentively. Take notes if it helps.
Yeah.
Try to identify the specific factors that contribute to their belief. Are they concerned about the Supreme Court's influence? Do they distrust the electoral process? Have they witnessed events that have shapen their faith in institutions?
Okay, so I'm gathering information, trying to understand the roots of their perspective. What do I do with that information once I have it? How do I transition from listening to sharing my own perspective without turning it into a confrontation?
Once you feel you have a good grasp of their viewpoint, you can start to share your own perspective, not as a counter argument, but as an alternative interpretation.
Yeah.
You might say something like, "I understand your concern about the Supreme Court. It's true that they have the power to interpret the Constitution. However, they're also bound by precedent and legal norms. And there's a strong argument to be made that the 22nd Amendment is clear and unambiguous."
Okay, so I'm acknowledging their concern about the Supreme Court, but I'm also offering a different way of looking at the situation, a different interpretation of the court's role and the constraints they face.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the key here is to remain respectful and to avoid any language that could be perceived as judgmental or condescending. It's not about proving them wrong or trying to win the argument. It's about expanding their perspective and inviting them to consider alternative viewpoints.
That's a really interesting approach. It's like we're reframing the whole purpose of the conversation. It's not about defeating the other person, but about expanding our collective understanding of the issue.
Exactly. And as you continue the conversation, keep asking questions, exploring areas of agreement and disagreement, and seeking clarification where needed. The goal is to create a space where both parties feel heard, respected, and challenged to think more deeply about the issue at hand.
Yeah, this feels like such a refreshing way to approach these conversations, especially in our current political climate where everything feels so polarized and antagonistic. But I have to admit, I'm still a bit skeptical. Is it really possible to have a productive dialogue with someone who's deeply entrenched in their beliefs, especially when those beliefs are rooted in fear or mistrust? How do we break through those emotional barriers?
It's not always easy, and it certainly requires patience and a willingness to listen deeply, but it is possible, and it starts with a willingness to shift our own mindset. We have to move away from that win-lose mentality and embrace a more collaborative approach where the goal isn't to defeat the other person, but to understand them, to learn from them, and to find common ground where it exists.
Okay, so it's about recognizing that we're not enemies in a battle of ideas, but fellow citizens trying to navigate a complex and often confusing world. It's about recognizing that we all have something to contribute to the conversation, even if we disagree on the specifics.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the inherent value of diverse perspectives. And understanding that even those we disagree with can offer insights that might challenge our own assumptions and enrich our understanding of the issue.
So we're talking about a fundamental shift in how we approach these these conversations. But I'm still wondering how do we actually make this happen in practice? It feels like such a tall order, especially in our current political climate where everything feels so polarized and divisive.
It is a tall order, no doubt about it, but it's not insurmountable. And it starts with small steps. It starts with being more mindful of our own language, the way we frame our arguments, and the tone we adopt when engaging with others. It starts with listening more than we speak, asking clarifying questions and trying to understand the underlying motivations and concerns that drive people's viewpoints.
Okay, so it's about cultivating empathy, practicing active listening, and approaching these conversations with a genuine desire to understand rather than to judge or to convert. It's about treating each other with respect and recognizing that we all have a stake in the outcome of these conversations. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that we're all part of a larger community, and that our words and actions have consequences. We need to treat each other with respect, even when we disagree, and strive to find common ground wherever possible.
Right. It's a reminder that even in the midst of heated political debates, we can still choose to be decent human beings. We can choose to engage with each other in a way that honors our shared humanity,
Right.
and recognizes the importance of respectful dialogue even when we disagree on the fundamentals.
Absolutely. And that decency, that willingness to engage with each other in a respectful and constructive way is essential for a healthy democracy. It's what allows us to have these difficult conversations, to grapple with complex issues, and to find solutions that work for everyone.
I love that. It's a reminder that our democracy is not just about laws and institutions, but about the way we treat each other, the way we engage in dialogue, and the way we strive to find common ground, even in the face of profound disagreement.
It's about recognizing that our democracy is a shared project. This constant work in progress that requires our active participation, our willingness to listen, and our commitment to finding solutions that work for all of us.
So where does that leave us in our exploration of this possibility of a Trump third term? I mean, we've examined the legal arguments, the anxieties surrounding potential loopholes, and the historical context that shapes our understanding of presidential power. But we haven't yet delved into the specific concerns raised in the Rolling Stone article. David S. Cohen's piece offers a very different perspective on this issue, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts on his analysis.
You're right. We've spent a lot of time unpacking the anxieties and the fears surrounding a potential Trump third term.
Hmm.
But Cohen's article offers a more grounded analytical perspective on the legal and political realities of such a scenario. Let's turn our attention to his arguments and see what insights we can glean from his analysis.
Lead the way. I'm ready to dive into Cohen's perspective and see how it adds to our understanding of this complex issue. All right, so we're turning our attention to David S. Cohen and his Rolling Stone article. Where does he stand on all this?
Well, Cohen, he really dives right in. He starts by emphasizing the clarity of the 22nd Amendment. He argues that it quite clearly prohibits anyone from being elected president more than twice. In his view, Bannon's suggestion that Trump could run again is little more than an attempt to just stir the pot, to provoke both supporters and opponents.
So Cohen seems to think there's really no legal leg to stand on here when it comes to a third term. Is that accurate?
Well, he does acknowledge that some technical loopholes exist,
Right.
but he argues that they're ultimately flimsy and unlikely to hold up under serious scrutiny. His main concern lies with the Supreme Court's potential to reinterpret the amendment in a way that could advance Trump's ambitions.
Right, and we've talked about that quite a bit already. That the Supreme Court's role seems to be this huge looming question mark for a lot of folks. What's Cohen's take on that?
He's not exactly optimistic. I have to say, he points out that the court's current conservative majority, including those three Trump appointees, has already shown a willingness to rule in Trump's favor on some pretty controversial issues. He worries that if the court were to side with Trump on a third term challenge, it would be a really dangerous signal, suggesting a real erosion of our democratic norms.
That's a scary thought. But is it realistic? Could the Supreme Court actually overturn a constitutional amendment based on a technicality? I mean, that seems pretty far-fetched even in today's political climate.
It would be uncharted territory, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But Cohen argues that we're living in unprecedented times where the rule of law is being challenged in ways we haven't seen before. He's concerned that the court, with its current makeup, might prioritize political expediency over legal precedent.
So he's saying that we're in this precarious situation where even the fundamental foundations of our democracy are potentially at stake.
That's a fair assessment of his viewpoint. Cohen doesn't sugarcoat things. He warns that if the court were to give a green light to a Trump third term, the consequences could be dire. He suggests it could lead to a further concentration of power, a crackdown on dissent, even a slide towards authoritarianism.
Okay, we're talking about some serious worst case scenarios here. But is Cohen being alarmist? Are these legitimate concerns, or is he letting his imagination run wild?
Well, it's important to remember that Cohen isn't alone in his anxieties. A lot of legal scholars and political commentators have voiced similar concerns about the potential for democratic backsliding in the U.S. They point to the rise of populist authoritarianism around the world, the increasing polarization of American politics, and the erosion of trust in our institutions as warning signs that we just can't ignore.
So it's not just about Trump as an individual, but about these larger, more systemic trends that are potentially threatening the health of our democracy.
Exactly. And that's what makes Cohen's article so valuable. It's a bit of a wake-up call, reminding us that we can't take our democracy for granted. We have to be vigilant, engaged, and willing to stand up for the principles that make our country strong.
It's been quite a journey, this deep dive. We've gone from the intricate details of the 22nd Amendment to these much broader questions about the future of American democracy. I feel like we've covered so much ground.
We have, and
Yeah.
it's a testament to the complexity of this issue. There's no easy answer, no simple solution. What we have is a web of interconnected legal, political, and social forces that are shaping the landscape of our democracy.
So where do we go from here? What's the takeaway for our listeners? What should they be thinking about as they navigate this incredibly complex and uncertain terrain?
I think the most important takeaway is that we're all stakeholders in our democracy. We have a responsibility to be informed, engaged, and willing to hold our leaders accountable. We need to understand the rules of the game, the potential threats to our system, and the ways we can safeguard the values that we hold dear.
It's not enough to just sit on the sidelines and watch. We need to be active participants to make our voices heard and to fight for the kind of future we want for our country.
Absolutely. And that fight begins with education. It begins with understanding the issues, having these difficult conversations, and seeking common ground with those who might see the world differently than we do.
So we need to be informed, engaged, and open to dialogue. Sounds like a good roadmap to me.
It's a good starting point. And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. There's so much more to explore, so many nuances to uncover, and so many potential scenarios to consider. This deep dive has given us a foundation, but it's up to each of us to continue the exploration.
We've explored those anxieties surrounding a potential third term, delved into the legal framework, and even considered what a more productive, nuanced conversation about all of this could look like. I think we've covered a lot of ground and hopefully given our listeners a lot to chew on. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Just this, the future of our democracy truly is in our hands. It's up to each of us to be informed, engaged, and active participants in shaping the kind of society we want to live in.
Beautifully said. That's a wrap on today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Until next time, stay curious and keep those questions coming.